In February 1637, a single tulip bulb in Amsterdam was worth more than a wealthy merchant's house. 12 acres of land, 60 fat cattle, 15 years of a craftsman's wages, all for one flower bulb that hadn't even bloomed yet. 3 days later, it was worth nothing. This is the story of the first speculative bubble in human history, the original financial mania. And exactly the same thing is happening right now. Welcome to Ruins and Reason. Every week, I tell the story of a financial disaster that shaped history and shows up again with new names every generation. Today, how the Dutch invented the modern financial bubble 400 years before crypto. To understand why a flower bulb cost more than a house, you have to understand 17th century Holland. Because nothing about this story makes sense in any other place at any other time. In 1600, the Dutch Republic was the wealthiest nation on earth per capita. Not the biggest, not the most powerful, the richest person for person. Amsterdam alone handled more international trade than London, Paris, and Madrid combined. The Dutch East India Company, founded in 1602, was the world's first publicly traded corporation. By 1637, it had paid out an annual dividend every year for 35 years straight. At its peak, it would be worth more than Apple, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft combined in modern terms. The Dutch had invented modern capitalism, and they were drowning in money. A merchant class that didn't exist anywhere else in Europe had spare cash, a lot of it, and nothing to spend it on. In England, you had to be born noble to own land. In France, the aristocracy controlled the economy. In Spain, gold from the Americas flowed straight into the king's pockets. But in Holland, a baker's son could become richer than a duke. And once you were rich, you wanted to show it. Enter the tulip. Tulips weren't European. They came from the Ottoman Empire, specifically from the gardens of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent in the 1500s. A Flemish ambassador brought a few bulbs back to Vienna in 1554. By the 1590s, they had reached Holland, and the Dutch went insane for them. Why? 3 reasons. First, they were exotic. They came from a mysterious Eastern empire. Owning one signaled wealth and worldliness. Second, they were rare. Tulips don't grow easily. A bulb takes 7 years to flower from seed. The most beautiful varieties, striped, flame-colored, multicolored petals, were almost impossible to reproduce. And third, and this is critical, the most stunning tulips, the ones with broken streaks of color, were caused by a virus. Nobody knew that in 1630. They just knew that some bulbs produced flowers that looked like they were painted. They couldn't be predicted. They couldn't be mass-produced. Each one was unique. A rare tulip wasn't a flower. It was a status symbol, a walking advertisement for wealth, and in a country with too much money and too few things to spend it on, that was a dangerous combination. By 1620, a single rare tulip bulb could cost as much as a workman's annual salary. By 1623, the famous Semper Augustus bulb, the most prized variety in Holland, was worth 1,000 guilders. For context, the average Dutchman earned around 150 guilders per year. So one bulb equaled 6.5 years of wages. In 1633, that same bulb was worth 5,000 guilders. By late 1636, 12,000. Let me give you a sense of what 12,000 guilders bought you in 17th century Holland. A skilled craftsman earned about 250 guilders a year. A modest house in Amsterdam cost about 300. A luxurious canal-side mansion, the kind reserved for the richest merchants, cost around 10,000. 12,000 guilders for a flower bulb meant more than a mansion, more than a craftsman would earn in 50 years. And it wasn't just one variety. Lists of tulip prices from 1637, actual surviving documents, show transactions like 1 viceroy bulb in exchange for 2 lasts of wheat, 4 lasts of rye, 4 fat oxen, 8 pigs, 12 sheep, 2 hogsheads of wine, 4 tons of beer, 2 tons of butter, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a complete bed, a suit of clothes and a silver drinking cup. Total value, 2,500 guilders for 1 flower. But here's where it gets interesting. And this is the part most people don't know. The actual tulips weren't being traded. By 1635, almost no one was buying physical bulbs anymore. They were buying contracts. Pieces of paper that said, "I promise to sell you this bulb when it blooms next summer." The buyer would pay now, take the contract, and then, before the bulb even came out of the ground, sell that contract to someone else for a higher price. The Dutch had invented the futures market. They didn't even own the flowers. They owned promises about flowers. And those promises were being traded in taverns, in back rooms, in something they called wind handle, literally wind trade, trading air. Carpenters quit their jobs to become tulip dealers. Sailors sold their ships. A wealthy merchant named Adriaan Pauw, president of the Dutch East India Company, had a personal tulip garden valued at hundreds of thousands of guilders. Single mothers mortgaged their homes. Farmers bet their next 10 harvests. One contemporary account describes a chimney sweep, a man who cleaned soot from chimneys for a living, making more money in a single week of tulip trading than he had earned in his entire previous career. Everyone was getting rich, until they weren't. The first week of February 1637 was the highest point of the bubble. We have records from a tulip auction in the small town of Alkmaar on February the 5th, a single afternoon sale that brought in 90,000 guilders. Today, that would be roughly $6 million in purchasing power for one afternoon, in one town, selling flowers that didn't exist yet. The buyers at that auction included tailors, bricklayers, weavers, peasants, people who had no business owning hundreds of guilders worth of anything, let alone speculative flower contracts. Then came February the 3rd, 1637, 3 days before the Alkmaar auction, a small tulip auction in the city of Haarlem. Something was scheduled to be sold. The bidding started. Nobody bid. The auctioneer dropped the price. Still nothing. He dropped it again, and again, and again. Whatever caused that moment, historians still debate it. Some say a rumor that the bubonic plague was spreading. Others say a wealthy buyer just decided not to show up. Some say it was the simple mathematical truth. At 12,000 guilders per bulb, no one had any money left to buy. What's certain is this: news of the failed auction spread through Holland in days. By February 7th, every market in the country had collapsed. The contracts everyone was holding, those promises about flowers that hadn't bloomed yet, became worthless overnight. The carpenters who had quit their jobs, the sailors who had sold their ships, the chimney sweep with his fortune. They all woke up to discover their wealth was nothing, just paper. A bulb that had sold for 5,000 guilders on February 1st was worth 50 guilders by February 10th. The Semper Augustus, the king of tulips, the most expensive flower ever sold up to that point, went from 12,000 guilders to less than 100 in 3 weeks. The Dutch government tried to intervene. They declared all tulip contracts could be cancelled by paying 10% of the original price, then 5%, then less. Eventually they gave up and let the courts decide individual cases. The courts mostly refused to enforce any tulip debts at all. In other words, if you had bought a contract for 10,000 guilders, you didn't owe anything. But if you had sold one expecting to receive 10,000, you got nothing. Thousands of fortunes evaporated in days. People who had been wealthy on February 1st were destitute by March 1st. Some committed suicide, others fled the country. The bubble was over. Here's where the story gets more complicated than the legend. For most of the last 200 years, Tulipmania has been told as a story of total economic catastrophe, a country brought to its knees by flowers. That's how Charles Mackay told it in his 1841 book, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, the book that made Tulipmania famous. But modern historians, particularly Anne Goldgar, in her 2007 book Tulipmania, have pushed back on this. Goldgar spent years going through Dutch court records from the 1630s and found something surprising. Very few people were actually ruined. Most of the largest losses were paper losses. People didn't actually pay the 12,000 guilders they had agreed to pay. The contracts collapsed before money changed hands. The courts refused to enforce them. Most traders walked away embarrassed, but financially intact. The Dutch economy as a whole was barely dented. The country continued its golden age for another 50 years. The East India Company kept paying dividends. Amsterdam stayed the financial capital of the world. So why does Tulipmania still matter? If it didn't actually crash an economy, why is it the most famous bubble in history? Because of what it revealed. Tulipmania showed for the first time in recorded history that a price can completely detach from value, that an entire society can collectively decide a thing is worth a fortune for no rational reason, and then, just as collectively, decide it's worth nothing. It revealed the psychology of crowds. It showed that intelligent people, when surrounded by other people getting rich, will do irrational things to join in. That fear of missing out is older than the internet by 400 years. Most importantly, it revealed a pattern that has repeated almost identically every generation since. 1719, France. A Scottish economist named John Law convinces the French king to fund the Mississippi Company, a venture to colonize Louisiana. Stock prices increase 40 times in 3 years. People become millionaires overnight. Then the bubble pops and France goes bankrupt. 1720. England. The South Sea Company promises to take over British government debt in exchange for a monopoly on trade with South America. The trade routes don't actually exist. The stock collapses, and Isaac Newton, yes, that Isaac Newton, loses the equivalent of $3 million in today's money. He famously said, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." 1929. New York, the Roaring Twenties. Stocks have been rising for nearly a decade. Shoeshine boys give stock tips. Then, in October, the market loses 90% of its value. The Great Depression begins. Doesn't end for 10 years. 2000. Silicon Valley. The dot-com bubble. Companies with no profits, no products, no plans, just a website ending in .com are worth billions. Pets.com, Webvan, Boo.com, all worth tens of billions at peak, all worth zero by 2002, 2008. Wall Street. Mortgage-backed securities, houses can only go up in value, everyone said, until they didn't. The global financial system nearly collapsed. 2017, crypto, Bitcoin from $1,000 to $19,000 in a year. Ethereum, $10 to $1,400. Then a 90% crash. 2021. NFTs, a JPEG of a bored ape sells for $1.5 million. The same JPEG is worth $30,000 2 years later. 2022. FTX. Sam Bankman-Fried, the youngest billionaire in the world, runs a $32 billion crypto exchange, or more accurately, runs a $32 billion Ponzi scheme. He's now in prison. 2024. Meme stocks, GameStop, AMC. Reddit traders coordinate to push prices up purely on attention. No business reason, just hype, every single time. The pattern is identical. New technology or new asset or new opportunity. Early adopters make money. Stories spread. Average people pile in. Prices detach from any rational measure. Smart money gets nervous. Something, anything, triggers a sell. The crash is faster than the rise. People who got in late lose everything. The Dutch tulip traders of 1637 didn't have Twitter. They didn't have Robinhood. They didn't have crypto exchanges. They had handwritten contracts, traded in taverns over beer. But the psychology was identical to what's happening on your phone right now. The same emotions, the same blind spots, the same stories told over and over. Mike Dash, in his book Tulipomania, wrote one line that stuck with me. There has never been another bubble quite like the Tulipmania, but there have been many that were similar enough to make the comparison meaningful. If you knew nothing about Tulipmania before today, what other bubbles do you think we're living through right now? Drop your guess in the comments. Next week, I'm covering the man who literally bankrupted France using nothing but paper and confidence, John Law and the Mississippi Bubble. It's even crazier than this one. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And thank you for watching Ruins and Reason.